The autumn wind stirred the dust on the platform of Cottonwood Springs, Wyoming Territory, 1878. Sophia Jones clutched her valise tighter as the train whistle gave its final, mournful cry. Panic fluttered in her chest like a trapped bird. This didn't look right. Not at all. Cottonwood Springs. 15-minute stop, the conductor called. Sophia rushed to him, her bonnet nearly flying off in her haste. Sir, I believe there's been a mistake. I'm meant to disembark at Cottonwood Creek, in Nebraska Territory. The conductor's weathered face crinkled in sympathy beneath his cap. I'm sorry, miss. Cottonwood Creek was 2 stops back. This here's Cottonwood Springs, Wyoming. Wyoming. The blood drained from Sophia's face. But I'm expected in Nebraska. Tomorrow. By my intended. The words felt strange on her tongue. Henry Blackford, a man she knew only through 6 months of correspondence, awaited his mail-order bride in a town she was now miles away from. Next train eastbound ain't until Thursday, the conductor said apologetically. 4 days from now. Sophia's knees weakened. For days. Her carefully scheduled arrival, the wedding planned for the day after tomorrow, all ruined by a misheard station name and her own inexperience with travel. Mr. Blackford would think she'd changed her mind, that she'd abandoned their arrangement. The shame of it burned hot in her chest. Is there a telegraph office? She asked desperately. Just closed yesterday. Operator took sick and they ain't found a replacement. Nearest telegraph is in Laramie, 30 miles west. Sophia watched helplessly as the conductor swung back aboard the train. With a belch of steam and iron, the locomotive pulled away, leaving her alone on the platform with her valise, carpet bag, and the horrifying realization that she was stranded in the wrong town, in the wrong territory, with no way to contact her intended. A sudden gust of wind caught her bonnet, tearing it from her head. The pale blue ribbon that had secured it fluttered uselessly as the hat tumbled down the platform. Sophia lurched after it, her corset constricting her breathing as she stumbled in her practical traveling boots. Just as the bonnet was about to dance beyond reach, a large, sun-darkened hand caught it. The hand belonged to a tall man with serious eyes the color of a summer storm. His dark blonde hair was in need of cutting, falling across his forehead in a way that spoke of neglect rather than fashion. The scar that bisected his right eyebrow gave him a perpetually questioning look. Yours, ma'am? He asked, holding out the bonnet. His voice was deep, with the slightest rasp, like leather worn smooth by years of use. Thank you, Sophia replied, accepting the hat with as much dignity as she could muster. I find myself in quite a predicament, sir. I've stepped off at the wrong station. The man nodded once, taking in her travel-worn appearance. Thomas Tucker, he introduced himself simply. I run the Double T Ranch outside of town. Where were you headed? Cottonwood Creek, Nebraska Territory. I was to meet someone. Sophia couldn't bring herself to explain her full circumstances to this stranger. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment. The conductor says there's no eastbound train for 4 days. Thomas Tucker's eyes softened slightly. Town's got a small boarding house. Mrs. Whitaker runs it. Decent enough place for a lady. Thank you, Mr. Tucker. I appreciate the direction. Sophia glanced toward the dusty main street, feeling more lost than she had ever felt in her 22 years of life. Though I fear I shall have to economize carefully. This delay was not in my plans, nor my budget. Something flickered across Thomas Tucker's face. A hesitation, perhaps even sympathy. My wagon's just over there, he said, gesturing to a weathered but well-maintained farm wagon hitched to 2 sturdy horses. I can take you to Mrs. Whitaker's, save you the walk with those bags. Relief flooded through Sophia. That would be most kind, Mr. Tucker. As Thomas loaded her bags into the wagon, Sophia caught sight of a small wooden horse tucked into his coat pocket. It was a child's toy, lovingly carved but well-worn. Before she could comment, he had turned away to help her up onto the bench. The wheels creaked as they rolled down Cottonwood Springs Main Street, a modest affair with a general store, saloon, small church, and a smattering of other businesses. Sophia noticed Thomas Tucker commanded respectful nods from the townspeople they passed. She also noticed how his left hand occasionally drifted to his pocket where the wooden horse resided, as if checking to ensure it was still there. You have children, Mr. Tucker? Sophia ventured, unable to contain her curiosity. His hands tightened on the reins. A son, James. He's 8. There was something in his voice, a carefully controlled emotion, that made Sophia sense there was more to the story. But before she could inquire further, the wagon came to a stop in front of a neat two-story clapboard house with a sign reading Whitaker Boarding House. "Here we are," Thomas said, jumping down to help with her bags. As he lifted her carpet bag, a folded letter slipped from an outer pocket, falling into the dusty street. Thomas picked it up, his eyes inadvertently catching the signature before he handed it back. "With expectation and affection, Henry Blackford." Something shifted in his expression. "Mail-order bride?" he asked quietly, the words carrying no judgment. Sophia snatched the letter back, mortification heating her face. "Yes, and now I've ruined everything by getting off at the wrong station. He'll think I've jilted him." Thomas Tucker looked at her for a long moment, his storm cloud eyes unreadable. "Mrs. Whitaker charges $1 a night. Meals extra." He hesitated, then continued. "I've got an arrangement to propose, if you're interested. Might solve both our problems." Before Sophia could ask what he meant, the boarding house door swung open to reveal a plump, middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a calculating smile. "Well now, Mr. Tucker, who've you brought me?" Mrs. Whitaker's gaze swept over Sophia with undisguised curiosity. "This is Miss Jones," Thomas replied, touching his hat brim respectfully. "She's found herself stranded until the Thursday train." Mrs. Whitaker's smile widened. "Well, come in, come in. We'll get you settled right away. Though I must warn you, with the cattle buyers in town, I've only got the small attic room available. $3 for 4 nights, meals included. In advance." Sophia's heart sank. $3 was nearly half of her remaining money, funds she'd been counting on to establish herself in her new marriage. She hesitated on the bottom step, one hand clutching the railing. "Actually, Mrs. Whitaker," Thomas interjected, "I was about to offer Miss Jones a temporary position. My housekeeper left last month, and James—" He paused, that same controlled emotion entering his voice. "James could use some looking after. Just until Thursday's train." Sophia turned to him in surprise, while Mrs. Whitaker's eyebrows shot toward her hairline. "A respectable woman alone at your ranch, Mr. Tucker?" Mrs. Whitaker's tone dripped with scandalized interest. My. Mrs. Peterson from church would come as companion, of course," Thomas added quickly. "She's been helping with James already. Miss Jones would have her own room, proper pay, and I'd personally ensure she makes Thursday's train." The offer hung in the air between them. Sophia knew accepting meant delaying meeting her intended by even more than the 4 days. It would take additional time to write to Mr. Blackford from Wyoming, explain her situation, and await his response. But the practical matter of conserving her limited funds weighed heavily. More than that, though, was the mystery in Thomas Tucker's eyes when he mentioned his son, the wooden horse, the absence of any mention of a wife. There was a story there, one that tugged at Sophia's curiosity. "I accept your offer, Mr. Tucker," she said finally. "But I must send word to Mr. Blackford as soon as possible." Thomas nodded. "I'll be writing to Laramie on business tomorrow. You can write your letter tonight, and I'll ensure it's telegraphed." Mrs. Whitaker made a disapproving sound. "Well, I never." A mail-order bride taking employment elsewhere before even meeting her groom. The scandal. Sophia lifted her chin. "Necessity makes pragmatists of us all, Mrs. Whitaker." As they drove away from the boarding house, Sophia caught the glint of something that might have been approval in Thomas Tucker's eyes. But it was quickly masked, leaving her to wonder what exactly she had gotten herself into, and what sorrows lay hidden behind the stoic rancher's carefully controlled demeanor. The Double T Ranch sat nestled in a valley 15 miles outside of Cottonwood Springs, its main house a substantial 2-story structure of weathered pine with a wide front porch. A barn, bunkhouse, and several outbuildings completed the homestead. Cattle dotted the distant hillsides, and the afternoon sun cast long shadows across what appeared to be a well-established operation. "It's lovely," Sophia murmured as the wagon crested the final rise. "Been in my family 12 years. Thomas replied, a hint of pride breaking through his reserved manner. "Started with 30 head of cattle and a dream. Now we run over 800. As they approached the house, Sophia noticed a thin, elderly woman sitting on the porch, knitting while a young boy sat beside her, listlessly pushing a stick through the boards at his feet. The boy looked up as the wagon approached, his face lighting momentarily before settling back into a solemn expression that seemed far too mature for his years. That's Mrs. Peterson from church, Thomas explained in a low voice. And my son, James. The resemblance between father and son was unmistakable. The same storm-colored eyes, the same strong jawline. But where Thomas carried his seriousness like a mantle of responsibility, the boy's solemnity seemed born of something deeper, more painful. "Papa," James called, standing as the wagon pulled up. His eyes darted curiously to Sophia. "James," Thomas acknowledged with a nod that somehow contained both affection and restraint. "This is Miss Jones. She'll be staying with us until Thursday, helping around the house." Mrs. Peterson rose, her knitting clutched in gnarled hands. "About time you found someone, Mr. Tucker. That poor boy's shirts are looking more like sieves than proper clothing, and I'm not spry enough to keep up with housekeeping anymore." "Miss Jones is only here temporarily," Thomas emphasized, helping Sophia down from the wagon. "She has other commitments." Something flickered across James's face, disappointment, perhaps, before he schooled his features back to polite indifference. "How do you do, Miss Jones?" he asked with rehearsed politeness. "Very well, thank you, James," Sophia replied warmly. "I hope we'll become good friends during my stay." The boy's eyes widened slightly at her direct address, as if unaccustomed to such attention. He opened his mouth to respond, but was interrupted by Mrs. Peterson. "Well, I should be getting home. My Arthur will be wondering where his supper is." She gathered her things, then fixed Thomas with a stern look. "I'll be by tomorrow afternoon to ensure everything is proper." After she departed, Thomas showed Sophia to a modest but clean bedroom on the second floor. "My wife's sewing room, once," he said, then fell silent, as if the words had escaped before he could contain them. "Your wife?" Sophia prompted gently. "May I ask?" "Typhoid. 3 years ago." The words were clipped, factual. Jane. She was from Boston originally. Never quite took to ranch life, but she tried. For James's sake. "I'm very sorry," Sophia said, recognizing the grief that still shadowed his eyes. Thomas nodded once, then gestured to a small writing desk by the window. "You can write your letter there. We'll leave for Laramie at first light, return by nightfall." "Thank you, Mr. Tucker." After he left, Sophia sat at the desk, pen poised over paper, uncertain how to explain her situation to Henry Blackford. How did one tell a waiting groom that his bride had accidentally alighted at the wrong station and taken employment with a widowed rancher? In the end, she wrote simply, "Dear Mr. Blackford, I regret to inform you that due to a misunderstanding, I disembarked at Cottonwood Springs, Wyoming Territory, rather than Cottonwood Creek. The next eastbound train does not depart until Thursday. I have taken temporary employment to sustain myself and will arrive in Cottonwood Creek as soon as transportation allows. I apologize for any inconvenience this causes and hope you will understand the unfortunate circumstances. Sincerely. Sophia Jones." She sealed the letter, wondering if its formal tone betrayed her growing uncertainty about the arrangement she had made through a matrimonial advertisement 6 months prior. Henry Blackford's letters had been polite, informative about his hardware store and home, but lacking in the warmth she had hoped might develop through their correspondence. From downstairs came the sound of voices, Thomas instructing James to wash up for dinner. The boy's response was too quiet to hear, but something in the exchange tugged at Sophia's heart. There was distance there, a gap between father and son that seemed to echo through the house. At dinner, Sophia discovered that Thomas Tucker was an adequate, if unimaginative cook. The beef stew was hearty but bland, the bread clearly purchased from town rather than home-baked. "Mrs. Peterson brings food sometimes," James volunteered as they ate. "But Papa says we can't expect her charity forever." "No, we cannot," Thomas agreed, his tone suggesting this was a conversation they'd had before. "Every man must stand on his own 2 feet. Even if he's only 8? Sophia asked lightly, though the question carried weight. Thomas's spoon paused halfway to his mouth. "James knows what I mean." The boy ducked his head, pushing a piece of potato around his bowl. "Yes, sir." An uncomfortable silence fell, broken only when Sophia asked about the ranch's operations. Thomas answered readily enough, though his responses were practical, devoid of the passion she suspected might once have animated his descriptions. James remained quiet, occasionally glancing at Sophia as if trying to reconcile her presence at their table. After dinner, as Thomas cleared the dishes, James hesitantly approached Sophia. "Would you like to see my wooden animals, Miss Jones?" I have 17. I would love to, James. The boy ran upstairs, returning with a small wooden box. Inside were carefully carved animals, horses, cattle, a bear, even a delicate fawn. Each bore the marks of skilled craftsmanship. Did your father make these? Sophia asked, admiring the detail. James nodded, a flash of pride crossing his features. He used to make one every week. For me. Used to. The boy's face clouded. Not anymore. Not since Mama. From the kitchen doorway, Thomas's voice interrupted. Bedtime, James. Yes, sir. James carefully replaced his treasures in the box. Good night, Miss Jones. Good night, James. Thank you for showing me your wonderful collection. After the boy had gone upstairs, Thomas returned to the parlor, an awkward tension following him. I apologize if he bothered you. He's not accustomed to female company. He's a delightful child, Sophia replied honestly. And those carvings are extraordinary. You're very talented, Mr. Tucker. Thomas looked away, his jaw tightening. Just a hobby. To pass the time. James mentioned you used to make them regularly. That was before. The two words contained volumes of unspoken grief. Things change. Yes, Sophia agreed softly. They do. But children need constancy, especially after loss. Thomas's eyes flashed with something that might have been anger, quickly suppressed. I should check the stock. Your letter. I'll take it tomorrow. He was gone before Sophia could respond, the front door closing firmly behind him. She sat alone in the parlor, surrounded by a home that no longer felt lived in so much as endured. Somewhere in this house, a little boy was missing his mother and, in many ways, his father too. And somewhere in the darkness outside, a man was running from his grief rather than facing it. Sophia rose, moving to the mantel where a single photograph stood in a silver frame. A pretty woman with dark hair and a tentative smile held an infant swaddled in a christening gown. Beside her stood a younger Thomas Tucker, his face unlined by grief, eyes bright with promise. In that moment, Sophia understood the enormity of what had been lost in this house, and she wondered if, in 4 short days, she could possibly make any difference at all. Dawn arrived with a pale golden light filtering through the curtains of Sophia's temporary room. She dressed quickly in her second-best traveling dress, pinning her hair in a practical style that would withstand the long journey to Laramie and back. The house was quiet as she descended the stairs, but the aroma of coffee guided her to the kitchen. Thomas stood at the stove, his back to her, shoulders set in that now familiar rigid line. He turned as she entered, nodding briefly in acknowledgement. Coffee's hot, he said. We should leave within the hour. Thank you. Sophia accepted the cup he offered. Is James still sleeping? No. He's already out doing his morning chores. Thomas's voice carried a hint of pride. Boy knows his responsibilities. At 8. Sophia couldn't keep the question from her voice. Thomas's expression hardened slightly. Ranch life starts early. He feeds the chickens and collects eggs. Simple tasks appropriate for his age. Sophia nodded, not wanting to begin the day with an argument. I've prepared the letter for Mr. Blackford. Good. The telegraph operator in Laramie can send it today. With luck, your intended will receive it by tomorrow. Thomas spoke the word intended with an odd inflection that Sophia couldn't quite interpret. Breakfast was a silent affair of biscuits, preserved apple butter, and more coffee. As they were finishing, James burst through the back door, a basket of eggs in his hands, cheeks ruddy from the morning chill. 6 eggs today, Papa, he announced, then stopped short upon seeing Sophia at the table. His formal demeanor returned, like a mask sliding into place. Good morning, Miss Jones. Good morning, James. What a wonderful collection of eggs. The boy's solemn face brightened momentarily. Henrietta finally started laying again. She was broody for a while. You know all your chickens by name? Course I do. James looked at her as if this were the most obvious thing in the world. They're my responsibility. Thomas cleared his throat. Miss Jones and I will be gone most of the day. Mrs. Peterson will arrive after church to stay with you. James's face fell. Can't I come to Laramie too? Not today. Thomas's tone left no room for argument. I need you here. The boy's shoulders slumped, but he nodded obediently. Yes, sir. As Thomas went to ready the wagon, Sophia helped James put away the eggs. Perhaps tomorrow you could show me around the ranch, she suggested. I'd love to meet Henrietta and the others. James looked up, surprise and cautious hope in his eyes. Really? You want to see the chickens? I do. And anything else you'd like to show me? Even the creek where the frogs live? Papa says it's not a suitable place for. He stopped himself. For ladies, he finished quietly. Well, Sophia whispered conspiratorially, I'm particularly fond of frogs. The smile that broke across James's face was like sunshine after rain, brilliant and transformative. For just a moment, Sophia glimpsed the carefree child beneath the solemn exterior. The journey to Laramie took 4 hours, the wagon bumping along a rutted trail that gradually gave way to a more established road. Thomas drove in silence for the first hour, his focus apparently on the team of horses pulling them steadily westward. Sophia occupied herself by admiring the sweeping landscape of Wyoming territory, so different from the crowded streets of Philadelphia, where she had spent her entire life until boarding the westbound train a week ago. It's beautiful country, she finally said, breaking the silence. Wilder than I expected. Thomas glanced at her. Different from where you're from, I imagine. Completely. I've never seen such open space. Sophia hesitated, then added, I grew up in Philadelphia. My father was a bookkeeper for a textile mill. Both my parents died in the influenza outbreak of '75. Saying it aloud still brought a pang of grief, even 3 years later. I lived with my aunt afterward, but her house was quite full already. Thomas nodded, understanding the unspoken reality, another mouth to feed in an already struggling household. So you answered a matrimonial advertisement? Yes. Sophia fingered the envelope containing her letter to Henry Blackford. Mr. Blackford's advertisement was sensibly written. No flowery promises, just honest statements about his situation and expectations. And what were those expectations? Thomas asked, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Sophia considered the question. A practical arrangement. He owns a hardware store in Cottonwood Creek, has a house with 4 rooms. He is 42, a widower with no children. He wanted a wife who was healthy, of good character, and not afraid of hard work. Sounds like a business contract, Thomas observed, a hint of disapproval in his tone. Isn't that what marriage often is? Sophia countered. An exchange of security for companionship and domestic labor? Not always. The words were quiet, almost lost beneath the creak of the wagon wheels. Sophia studied his profile, noticing the way his hands tightened on the reins. You loved your wife very much. It wasn't a question, but Thomas answered anyway. I did, though I'm not certain she ever loved me as much. He seemed surprised by his own candor, his jaw tightening, as if regretting the admission. Why do you say that? Thomas was silent for so long that Sophia thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. Jane was from a good Boston family. Her father was a banker. She came west with her brother, who had tuberculosis. Thought the mountain air might cure him. After he died, she had no means to return east. He paused. I offered marriage. Security. A practical arrangement, Sophia said softly, echoing her earlier description. Thomas's mouth twisted in what might have been a smile, though it held little humor. I thought love would grow. For her. Mine was already there from the moment I saw her in town, looking like a hothouse flower that had been transplanted to the wilderness. Did it grow for her? She tried. For 9 years, she tried to love the land as I did, to embrace ranch life. But she was always looking eastward, dreaming of Boston and the life she'd left behind. He fell silent again. She loved James, though, with all her heart. Sophia sensed the unspoken pain beneath his words. And you've been raising him alone these past 3 years. Thomas nodded once, his profile rigid against the open sky. He's a good boy. Strong. He'll make a fine rancher someday. If that's what he wants, Sophia ventured carefully. Thomas turned to her then, a flash of something, defensiveness, perhaps, crossing his features. It's the legacy I have to give him. My father built the beginnings of this ranch from nothing. I've expanded it threefold. James will inherit land, cattle, a name that means something in this territory. Those are valuable gifts, Sophia acknowledged. As is your love. Thomas looked away, silence falling between them once more as the wagon continued its steady progress toward Laramie. The town of Laramie was considerably larger than Cottonwood Springs, boasting a proper main street lined with businesses, a schoolhouse, and even a small theater. Thomas guided the wagon directly to the telegraph office, where Sophia's message to Henry Blackford was transmitted eastward across the wires. As they waited for confirmation that the telegram had been sent, Sophia noticed Thomas studying a handwritten notice on the wall. Teacher wanted for Cottonwood Springs School. Inquire with town council. The schoolteacher left? She asked, curious. Miss Abernathy married a cattle buyer last month, Thomas explained. Left town with him. School's been closed since. What about James's education? He attends when there's a teacher. When there isn't. Thomas shrugged. I teach him what I can. Reading, figures. Sophia considered this. I was a teacher's assistant in Philadelphia for 2 years before. She let the sentence trail off, not wanting to complete it with before I decided to become a mail-order bride. Thomas looked at her with new interest. Were you? James is bright. Picks things up quickly. I noticed that. He's very articulate for his age. A hint of pride softened Thomas's stern features. Takes after his mother that way. She read to him every night. Poetry mostly. The telegraph operator called out. Message confirmed delivered to Cottonwood Creek, Nebraska territory, interrupting their conversation. As they left the telegraph office, Thomas hesitated on the boardwalk. I have business at the bank and the cattle broker's office. Might take an hour or two. You're welcome to look around town if you'd like. We could meet at the hotel restaurant for dinner before heading back. Sophia agreed readily, eager to stretch her legs after the long wagon ride. Laramie offered several shops worth exploring, and the unexpected freedom of an afternoon to herself was appealing. They parted ways at the bank, Thomas tipping his hat with a formality that seemed at odds with the personal conversation they'd shared on the journey. Sophia spent a pleasant hour browsing the mercantile, admiring fabrics she couldn't afford, and finally treating herself to a ribbon for her hair, a small extravagance that seemed justified by the money she would save staying at the ranch instead of the boarding house. In a small bookshop, she discovered a volume of children's stories and found herself thinking of James. The boy clearly hungered for attention, for connection. On impulse, she purchased the book, reasoning that she could leave it behind when she departed. The hotel restaurant was busy when she arrived for dinner, cattlemen and travelers filling the tables with boisterous conversation. Sophia spotted Thomas at a corner table, his tall figure unmistakable even in the crowded room. He rose as she approached, pulling out her chair with unexpected gallantry. Did you find Laramie to your liking? He asked as they settled. It's quite charming. I bought a book of children's stories, she admitted. For James. I hope you don't mind. Something flickered in Thomas's eyes, surprise, and perhaps something warmer. That's kind of you. He'll appreciate it. Their meal was simpler than the elaborate fare being served at other tables. Thomas ordered the least expensive items on the menu, and Sophia followed his lead, conscious that she was essentially in his employ and didn't wish to take advantage. As they ate, Thomas asked about her teaching experience, showing genuine interest in her responses. Sophia found herself describing her classroom in Philadelphia, the challenges and rewards of working with young minds. It was the longest conversation they had shared, and she was surprised to discover a dry wit beneath Thomas's serious exterior. You miss it, he observed. Teaching. I do, Sophia admitted. Very much. But opportunities for unmarried female teachers are limited, and my aunt's house was already overcrowded. And Mr. Blackford's advertisement promised security. Yes. Sophia studied her plate, suddenly less hungry than before. Though I always hoped for more than security alone. Thomas was quiet for a moment. What did you hope for? The question was unexpected, forcing Sophia to articulate desires she had kept carefully contained. Companionship, respect, the chance to create a true home. She paused. Perhaps, in time, affection, not love. Thomas's eyes held hers across the table. Love seems a luxury when basic survival is in question, Sophia replied softly. But yes, I suppose I hoped for love as well, unlikely as it might be in such an arrangement. The conversation lingered between them as they finished their meal. Outside, the sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. We should start back, Thomas said, settling their bill. I don't like leaving James for too long, and night driving can be dangerous. The return journey began in companionable silence, both lost in their own thoughts as the wagon rumbled eastward. The setting sun cast long shadows across the landscape, transforming the rolling hills into a tapestry of light and dark. They were perhaps halfway back to Cottonwood Springs when the first distant rumble of thunder reached them. Thomas glanced at the sky with concern. "Storm coming," he said grimly. "From the northwest. Moving fast." Sophia followed his gaze and saw dark, roiling clouds advancing across the previously clear sky. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain. "Will we make it back before it hits?" she asked. Thomas shook his head. "Not likely. There's a lined shack about 3 miles ahead. We can shelter there until it passes." The storm moved faster than anticipated. Within 20 minutes, the first fat drops of rain began to fall, quickly intensifying into a downpour. Lightning flashed across the darkened sky, followed by booming thunder that made the horses skitter nervously. Thomas handled the team with calm expertise, keeping them moving steadily toward shelter. The lined shack materialized out of the gloom, a small, sturdy cabin used by cowhands during roundup. Thomas drove the wagon directly to the door, jumping down to help Sophia through the pelting rain. Inside, the cabin was Spartan but dry, with a small stove, rough-hewn table, and 2 narrow bunks built into the wall. Not exactly the Laramie Hotel. Thomas apologized, lighting a lantern he found on a shelf. "But it'll keep us dry." Sophia stood dripping on the plank floor, suddenly aware of the impropriety of their situation. Alone in a remote cabin with a man she barely knew. It was precisely the sort of scenario that would horrify Mrs. Whitaker and potentially ruin her reputation. Thomas seemed to realize this simultaneously. "I'll get a fire started," he said awkwardly, moving to the stove. "There should be dry wood in that box. We might be here a while." As he busied himself with the fire, Sophia wrung out her sodden skirts as best she could. The rain hammered against the roof, occasional lightning illuminating the cabin's interior through its single window. "What about James?" she asked, concerned. "He'll be worried. Mrs. Peterson will stay the night if we don't return. It's happened before when I've been caught by weather." The fire caught, casting flickering light and welcome warmth through the small space. "She'll know what happened." Sophia nodded, though the thought of spending the night in this intimate setting with Thomas Tucker sent a flutter of nervousness through her chest. As if reading her thoughts, Thomas straightened, keeping a careful distance between them. "You take the bunk on the right," he said formally. "I'll stay by the fire." "That's not necessary," Sophia began. "It is," Thomas interrupted firmly. "Your reputation is at stake, and your promise to another man." The reminder of Henry Blackford fell between them like a physical barrier. Sophia moved to the bunk he'd indicated, sitting on its edge, uncertain what more to say. Thomas busied himself checking the cabin's meager provisions, finding a can of coffee, some jerky, and a half-full bag of beans. Not much for a proper meal, but it'll suffice until morning. The awkwardness that had developed between them in the restaurant returned tenfold, amplified by their forced proximity. Sophia cast about for a neutral topic of conversation. "Tell me about James," she said finally. "He seems like a remarkable child." Thomas's expression softened at the mention of his son. "He is too smart for his own good sometimes. Asks questions I don't always have answers for." "About his mother?" "Yes." Thomas sighed, sitting on a 3-legged stool near the stove. "And about everything else. Why the sky is blue. How birds know which way is south. Whether there are people living on the moon." Sophia smiled. The natural curiosity of children is one of the greatest joys of teaching. Their minds are so open to possibilities. "Jane used to say the same thing," Thomas said quietly. She had plans to educate him properly. Had books sent from Boston. She wanted. He paused. She wanted more for him than ranch life. "And what do you want for him?" The question hung in the air, punctuated by a particularly loud crack of thunder that rattled the cabin's walls. Thomas stared into the small fire, his profile illuminated by its glow. "I want him to be happy," he said finally. "But I also want him to value what generations of Tuckers have built, to understand the legacy he'll inherit." "Those don't have to be mutually exclusive," Sophia observed. "Education doesn't mean rejection of one's heritage." Thomas looked up, meeting her eyes across the small space. Jane thought it did. She saw education as a path away from the ranch. "Away from me." The vulnerability in his admission struck Sophia deeply. Here was the root of his reticence about his son's schooling. Fear that education would separate them, just as it had created distance between Thomas and his wife. "That's not always true," Sophia said gently. "Education can also deepen appreciation for one's home, one's history. It can provide new perspectives, new tools for building on what came before. Thomas considered her words, the firelight casting shadows across his thoughtful face. You sound like a true teacher, Miss Jones. Sophia, she corrected impulsively. Please, call me Sophia. A small smile touched his lips. Sophia, then. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the lined shack, something had shifted, a tentative bridge forming across the careful distance they had maintained. They talked late into the night, the conversation flowing more easily as formality gave way to genuine exchange. Thomas spoke of his childhood on the ranch, of learning the cattle business from his father, of his dreams for expanding the operation. Sophia shared stories of her teaching days, of the satisfaction she found in helping young minds develop, and of her own childhood in Philadelphia. Neither mentioned Henry Blackford or the uncertain future that awaited when Thursday's train departed. For this stolen night, suspended between responsibilities and realities, they were simply two people finding unexpected connection in the midst of a storm. When Sophia finally lay down on the narrow bunk, exhaustion overtaking her, the last thing she saw before closing her eyes was Thomas Tucker silhouetted against the dying fire, his face softer than she had yet seen it, watching over her with an expression that sent a warm current through her chest despite the night's chill. Morning arrived with brilliant clarity, the storm having washed the world clean during the night. Sophia woke to the aroma of coffee and the soft sounds of Thomas moving about the cabin. She sat up, smoothing her rumpled dress and attempting to tidy her hair. Good morning. Thomas greeted her, offering a tin cup of steaming coffee. Storm's passed. We should be able to get back to the ranch within a few hours. James must be worried, Sophia said, accepting the coffee gratefully. He understands the realities of ranch life. Weather happens. Thomas paused. Though he'll be glad to see you, I think. He's taken a shine to you. The admission warmed Sophia more than the coffee. He's a wonderful boy. You should be very proud. I am. Thomas turned to pack up the few items they'd used. More than he knows, perhaps. The journey back to the Double T was filled with a new ease between them, the shared experience of the storm having broken down some of the formal barriers. Thomas pointed out features of the landscape, naming creeks and rock formations, sharing the history of the territory as he knew it. When they crested the final rise overlooking the ranch, Sophia felt an unexpected tug of emotion. In just 2 days, the site of the pine house nestled in its protected valley had come to represent something she hadn't anticipated, a sense of belonging. James burst from the house as the wagon approached, running down the path with uncharacteristic abandon. Papa, Miss Jones, you're back. Thomas's face broke into a rare, full smile at his son's excitement. Were you worried, partner? No. James lied transparently, then amended, maybe a little. Mrs. Peterson said you probably got caught in the storm. We found shelter in the lined shack, Thomas explained, jumping down from the wagon to lift his son in a quick embrace. The spontaneous show of affection surprised Sophia, and apparently James as well, whose eyes widened before he returned the hug fiercely. I brought you something, Sophia said as Thomas helped her down from the wagon. She retrieved the book of children's stories from her bag. I thought we might read it together while I'm here. James's face lit up as he accepted the gift, his small fingers tracing the embossed cover. Thank you, Miss Jones. Will you read it now? Please. Thomas intervened gently. Miss Jones is probably tired from our journey, and you have chores to finish before dinner. To Sophia's surprise, James didn't protest. Instead, he nodded solemnly. Yes, sir. I'll finish quickly. He clutched the book to his chest as he ran toward the chicken coop, his excitement evident in every step. That was very kind of you, Thomas said as they walked toward the house. He treasures books. Jane. He hesitated. Jane read to him every night. It's one of the routines I've tried to maintain, but I'm not as good with the voices as she was. Perhaps I could read to him tonight? Sophia offered. If you wouldn't mind. Thomas's eyes met hers, gratitude evident in their storm-gray depths. I think we'd both like that very much. The afternoon passed quickly as Sophia helped restore order to the somewhat neglected house. She found satisfaction in the simple tasks of sweeping, dusting, and preparing a more substantial meal than the bachelor fare Thomas and James had been subsisting on. James completed his chores in record time, then hovered near Sophia as she worked, peppering her with questions about Philadelphia, about teaching, and finally, hesitantly, about why she had come west. "I'm meant to marry a man in Nebraska," Sophia explained carefully, aware that Thomas had entered the kitchen and was listening. "But I got off at the wrong train station." "So you're leaving on Thursday?" James's face fell. "Yes, I need to take the eastbound train." James kicked at the floor with the toe of his boot. "That's only 2 more days." "Yes." Sophia found herself strangely reluctant to confirm this reality. "But we'll make the most of them, won't we? You were going to show me the creek with the frogs tomorrow, remember?" The boy brightened slightly. "And my secret fort, if that's all right, Papa." He looked to his father for approval. Thomas nodded, though Sophia caught a flash of something like regret cross his features. "As long as Miss Jones is interested in such things. I assure you, Mr. Tucker, I find secret forts absolutely fascinating." Sophia replied with mock seriousness that made James giggle, a sound so unexpected and delightful that both adults found themselves smiling in response. After dinner, the 3 of them settled in the parlor, where Sophia read from the new book of stories. James leaned against her on the sofa, his eyes wide as she gave different voices to each character. Thomas sat in his chair by the fire, ostensibly reviewing ranch accounts, but Sophia noticed that he hadn't turned a page in his ledger for some time, his attention captured by the story as well. When it was James's bedtime, he asked shyly, "Will you read again tomorrow night, Miss Jones?" "Of course I will," Sophia promised, surprised by the thickness in her throat as she said it. After James had gone upstairs, a comfortable silence fell between Sophia and Thomas. The crackling fire and the occasional settling of the house were the only sounds as they sat, each lost in thought. "He hasn't been this animated in a long time," Thomas finally said, closing his ledger. "You have a gift with him. He's easy to love," Sophia replied simply, then flushed at her choice of words. Thomas studied her across the parlor. "You would have made a wonderful mother." The use of the conditional tense wasn't lost on Sophia. "Would have. I mean," Thomas seemed flustered, unusual for his normally composed demeanor. "You will, I'm sure, when you marry Mr. Blackford." The mention of her intended fell heavily between them. Sophia had not thought of Henry Blackford all day, she realized with a start. In the easy companionship she had found with Thomas and James, her promised future in Nebraska had receded like a distant shore. "Yes," she said, without conviction, "when I marry Mr. Blackford." Thomas rose abruptly. "It's been a long day. I should check on the stock before turning in." He was gone before Sophia could respond, leaving her alone with the dying fire and the growing awareness that her heart was venturing into dangerous territory. The next morning, Sophia woke to the smell of baking bread. Surprised, she dressed quickly and made her way to the kitchen, where she found James standing on a chair by the stove, carefully monitoring a loaf in the oven while Thomas kneaded dough on the table. "Good morning," Thomas said, looking up with a trace of embarrassment. "We thought we'd try our hand at proper baking." James remembered watching his mother. "I'm the official bread watcher," James announced proudly. "Papa says I have to make sure it doesn't burn." "You're doing a fine job," Sophia assured him, stepping into the flour-dusted kitchen. "May I help?" For the next hour, the 3 of them worked together, Sophia guiding their baking efforts with the skills she had learned from her own mother years ago. The kitchen filled with laughter as James attempted to shape his portion of dough into increasingly fanciful creatures, and Thomas revealed an unexpected talent for precise braiding of a loaf. "You never mentioned you could bake," Sophia teased as she showed him how to brush egg wash over the top of his creation. "Tucker family secret," he replied with mock gravity. "Passed down from my grandmother, who made the best sourdough bread in Tennessee before they came west." "Papa makes pancakes on Sundays," James volunteered, "but they're usually a little burnt on one side." "Traitor," Thomas accused without heat, ruffling his son's hair affectionately. Sophia watched the easy interaction between father and son, noting how the stiff formality that had characterized their relationship just days before had begun to soften. Thomas seemed younger somehow. The weight of grief momentarily lifted from his shoulders as he teased his son and shaped bread alongside Sophia. After breakfast, James could barely contain his excitement about showing Sophia his special places around the ranch. Thomas agreed to postpone some of his work to accompany them, explaining to Sophia in an undertone that the creek was a bit too far for James to guide her there alone. The day unfolded like a gift, bright autumn sunshine warming the land as James led Sophia from one secret location to another. The chicken coop where Henrietta and her feathered companions resided. The hollow stump where a family of rabbits had made their home. The ancient pine tree with low branches perfect for climbing, where James had constructed a rudimentary platform with his father's help. And finally, the creek, a clear, burbling stream that cut through a small ravine at the edge of Tucker property. True to James's promise, frogs congregated along its banks, their green forms blending with the reeds and grasses. This was Mama's favorite place, James confided as they sat on a fallen log beside the water. She used to bring a book and read here sometimes. Thomas, who had been skipping stones across a wider portion of the creek, stilled at his son's words. Sophia saw the familiar shadow pass over his features, the grief that was never far from surface. "Did she read to you here?" Sophia asked gently. James nodded. "Poetry mostly. She said it sounded better with the creek as music." "Your mother sounds like a very special person," Sophia said, careful to use the present tense rather than relegating Jane to the past. "She was." James traced patterns in the dirt with a stick. "Papa doesn't like to talk about her much. It makes him sad." Thomas moved toward them then, his expression unreadable. "It's not that I don't like to talk about her, James. It's just hard," James finished for him. "I know. It's hard for me too, sometimes." The simple acknowledgement seemed to catch Thomas off guard. He knelt beside his son, placing a hand on the boy's narrow shoulder. "I didn't realize you felt that way. Mrs. Peterson says it's all right to be sad sometimes, as long as we remember the happy things too." James looked up at his father with those serious gray eyes, so like Thomas's own. "I remember Mama laughing when you tracked mud all over her clean floor, and how she used to sing when she thought no one was listening." Thomas swallowed visibly. "I remember those things too, son. Maybe we could talk about her sometimes?" James suggested hesitantly. "Just a little, so we don't forget the good parts." The vulnerability in the boy's question brought a lump to Sophia's throat. She started to rise, feeling she should give father and son privacy for this moment, but Thomas's hand on her wrist stopped her. "Stay," he said quietly. Then, to James, "Yes, we can talk about her. I'd like that, and I think your mother would like it too." James smiled, a weight visibly lifting from his small shoulders. "Can we show Miss Jones the swimming hole next, before she has to leave on the train?" The reminder of Sophia's impending departure fell like a shadow across the sunny afternoon. Tomorrow was Thursday. Tomorrow, the eastbound train would carry her away from the Double T, away from James's eager questions and secret forts, away from Thomas's quiet strength and the warmth that had begun to grow between them. "If Miss Jones would like to see it," Thomas replied, his eyes meeting Sophia's with an unspoken question. "I would love to," she said, though her heart felt suddenly heavy in her chest. As they walked back toward the house later that afternoon, James ran ahead, chasing a butterfly across a meadow of late-blooming wildflowers. Thomas and Sophia followed more slowly, a companionable silence between them. "Thank you," Thomas said finally. "For James. For helping him talk about Jane. I didn't realize he needed that." "Children often protect their parents from their own grief," Sophia replied. "It's a natural instinct, but it can be isolating for them." Thomas nodded thoughtfully. "You understand children well. You will be an excellent mother." Again, that correction. Again, the awkward acknowledgement of Sophia's promised future elsewhere. "James makes it easy," she said, avoiding the implied discussion of her departure. "He's so bright, so eager to connect." "He's different with you," Thomas observed. "More himself. The way he was before Jane died. He trailed off. "Before you what?" Thomas stopped walking, his gaze fixed on his son in the distance. "Before I failed him. By withdrawing. By not knowing how to be both father and mother." The admission cost him visibly, this proud, reserved man acknowledging his perceived inadequacy. Sophia's heart ached for him. "You haven't failed him," she said firmly. "You've kept him safe, provided for him, loved him in the best way you knew how during an impossible time. It hasn't been enough." Thomas's voice was rough with emotion. "He deserves more than a father who can barely talk about his mother, who doesn't know how to answer his questions or read stories with the right voices." "Then learn," Sophia said simply. "Children don't need perfect parents, Thomas. They need parents who try, who grow alongside them." He turned to her then, surprise and something more complex in his expression. It was the first time she had used his given name, she realized belatedly. "Is that what you'll teach your children?" he asked quietly. "With Mr. Blackford?" The question pierced Sophia like a physical pain. The thought of leaving the next day, of never seeing James's smile again or watching Thomas gradually emerge from his grief, felt suddenly unbearable. "Yes," she managed to say, though the word felt hollow. "I suppose I will." James called to them from the meadow, waving excitedly about some discovery. The moment broke as they moved to join him, but something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings neither was prepared to name. That evening, after James had been tucked into bed with another story from his new book, Sophia sat at the small desk in her temporary room and attempted to write another letter to Henry Blackford. She owed him the courtesy of confirming her arrival on tomorrow's train, yet the words wouldn't come. Instead, her mind filled with images of the past 3 days. James's laughter as they baked bread together, Thomas's face softening as he watched his son climb the old pine tree, the three of them sitting by the creek as James spoke of his mother. Simple moments that had somehow woven themselves into the fabric of her heart. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Thomas stood in the hallway, holding a small wooden object in his hand. "May I come in?" he asked formally. Sophia nodded, setting aside her unwritten letter. Thomas entered but remained near the door, maintaining a respectful distance. "I wanted to give you this," he said, holding out the object, "as a thank you for everything you've done for James, for us." It was a carving, a delicate wooden rose in full bloom, each petal lovingly detailed, the stem curved gracefully with tiny thorns along its length. The craftsmanship was exquisite, revealing Thomas's true skill beyond the simpler animals he had made for his son. "It's beautiful," Sophia breathed, accepting the gift. "When did you find time to make this?" "Last night, after you went to bed." Thomas looked almost embarrassed. "I haven't carved anything new well, since Jane died. But I wanted you to have something to remember." He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. "To remember us. To remember what might have been." "Thank you," Sophia said, unable to express the emotions welling in her chest. "I'll treasure it always." Thomas nodded once, then turned to leave. At the door he paused. "The wagon will be ready at 9 tomorrow. To take you to the station." "Thomas," Sophia began, though she had no idea what she intended to say. He looked back, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Good night, Sophia." After he left, Sophia sat holding the wooden rose, its smooth petals cool against her fingers. Outside her window, the vast Wyoming sky spread in an endless blanket of stars, while inside, her heart struggled against the growing certainty that she was about to make the greatest mistake of her life. Morning arrived with a somber quiet settling over the Tucker household. Sophia dressed carefully in her best traveling suit, packing her few belongings with mechanical precision. The wooden rose she wrapped in a handkerchief and placed in her pocket rather than her bag, wanting to keep it close. Downstairs, Thomas and James waited in the kitchen. Breakfast had been prepared. The bread they had baked together yesterday, now sliced and served with preserves and coffee. James pushed his food around his plate without eating, his earlier animation replaced by subdued resignation. "Did you sleep well?" Thomas asked politely, as if Sophia were merely a guest rather than someone who had, in 3 short days, become integral to their small family. "Well enough, thank you," she replied with equal formality. James looked between them, his young face troubled by the sudden return of distance between the adults. "Do you have to go, Miss Jones?" The directness of the question hung in the air. Thomas opened his mouth, presumably to remind his son of propriety, but Sophia answered first. "Mr. Blackford is expecting me, James. I made a promise." "But you could stay here," James persisted. "You could teach at the school in town. Papa saw the notice in Laramie." Thomas set down his coffee cup with a sharp click. "James, that's enough. Miss Jones has obligations elsewhere." "But Papa," I said enough. Thomas interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. "Go make sure your chores are done before we leave for town." James slid from his chair, eyes downcast. "Yes, sir." At the door, he turned back. "I'm going to miss you, Miss Jones." "I'll miss you too, James," Sophia said, her throat tight with unshed tears. "Very much." After the boy left, silence fell between the adults. Thomas stared into his coffee as if it contained answers to questions he couldn't articulate. "He's become attached to you," he finally said. "I should have anticipated that." "Children form bonds quickly," Sophia replied. "It's a natural part of their openness to the world." "And adults?" Thomas looked up then, his eyes meeting hers. "Do they form bonds quickly too?" The question laid bare the current that had been building between them since that first moment on the train platform when he had caught her wayward bonnet. 3 days should not have been enough to form such a connection, yet here it was, undeniable and increasingly painful as the hour of her departure approached. "Sometimes," Sophia admitted softly, "when the circumstances are right." Thomas pushed back from the table, pacing to the window where the morning sun illuminated his profile. "I have no right to ask you to stay," he said, his voice low. "You made a commitment to Blackford. You have plans, a future waiting in Nebraska." "Yes," Sophia said, though the word felt like ash in her mouth. "And James and I will be fine. We were before you arrived. We will be after you've gone." Thomas's hands gripped the windowsill, his knuckles white with tension. "But I would be remiss if I didn't tell you that these past 3 days they've meant." He struggled for words. This man who guarded his emotions so carefully. Sophia stood, moving to his side by the window. "They've meant something to me too, Thomas," she said quietly. He turned to her then, conflict evident in his expression. "I can't offer you what Blackford can. A settled life. A proper home in town. The security you came west seeking. What can you offer?" Sophia asked, her heart pounding. "Hard work. Isolation. A ranch that demands everything and sometimes gives little in return." His voice roughened. "A man still healing from loss. A boy who needs more than I've been able to give him. And," Sophia pressed gently. Thomas's eyes held hers. "And a chance to build something true. Not a business arrangement, not a practical exchange. Something that might begin as friendship and respect, but could grow into." He stopped, uncertainty clouding his features. "Love," Sophia finished for him. "Yes." The word was barely audible, though I have no right to ask it of you. The clock on the mantel chimed 9, its cheerful tone at odds with the weight of the moment. Thomas straightened, the rancher's practicality reasserting itself. "We should go. The train won't wait." Sophia nodded, unable to speak past the emotion tightening her throat. They moved through the next hour as if in a dream, loading her bags into the wagon, James climbing up to sit between them for the journey to town, the double T receding behind them as they followed the road toward Cottonwood Springs and the waiting train. The station platform was nearly empty when they arrived, just the station master and a couple of traveling salesmen waiting for the eastbound train already visible in the distance, its plume of smoke marking its steady approach. Thomas helped Sophia down from the wagon, his hand lingering on hers a moment longer than necessary. James jumped down after them, his small face set in determined lines. "I made you something," he said, pulling a folded paper from his pocket. "To remember us." It was a drawing, childish but heartfelt, of 3 figures standing before a house. James, Papa, and Miss Jones were carefully labeled, the last with particular attention to the curls in Sophia's hair. "It's beautiful, James," Sophia said, kneeling to hug the boy tightly. "I will keep it always." "You could stay," James whispered against her shoulder. "Please." The train whistle sounded, closer now. Sophia released James and stood, meeting Thomas's gaze over his son's head. All the things left unsaid between them seemed to hang in the air like the dust motes dancing in the morning sunlight. "Your bags," Thomas said, retrieving them from the wagon. "And your ticket. I purchased it yesterday in Laramie." Sophia accepted the ticket, her fingers brushing his in the exchange. "Thank you. For everything." The train pulled into the station with a screech of brakes and billowing steam. Passengers disembarked, new ones prepared to board. The conductor called, "All aboard. Eastbound to Cheyenne, North Platte, Omaha, and all points east." It was time. Sophia turned toward the train, her heart heavier with each step. Behind her, James called out a final goodbye, his young voice cracking with emotion. She didn't look back, couldn't bear to see Thomas's face knowing it would be for the last time. The conductor helped her up the steps, directed her to an available seat. Through the window, she could see James clutching his father's hand, both Tucker males watching as the train prepared to carry her away from their lives. Thomas's expression was a mask of controlled emotion, but his eyes, those storm-gray eyes that had watched over her through the night in the lined shack, that had softened when his son laughed, that had looked into hers with growing warmth over the past 3 days, they told a different story. The wooden rose pressed against her hip in her pocket. James's drawing was folded carefully in her reticule. In her carpet bag was the book of children's stories, the one she had bought to leave behind but had packed in the confusion of the morning. Final boarding, the conductor called. Sophia sat motionless in her seat as the train whistle sounded again. Any moment now, the locomotive would lurch forward, beginning the journey that would take her to Nebraska territory, to Cottonwood Creek, to Henry Blackford and the secure, practical future she had arranged for herself before stepping off at the wrong station. "Miss? Your ticket." The conductor stood in the aisle, hand extended. Sophia stared at the ticket in her hand. Cottonwood Creek, Nebraska territory. The destination she had planned for months. The place where a man she barely knew awaited his mail-order bride. Through the window, James was now openly crying, his small shoulders shaking as Thomas knelt beside him, one arm around his son while his own gaze remained fixed on Sophia's window. With sudden clarity, Sophia knew she couldn't go. Not to Nebraska. Not away from the double T and the Tuckers. Not away from the chance at something true. "I'm sorry," she said to the confused conductor. "I've made a terrible mistake." She stood abruptly, gathering her reticule and pushing past the conductor toward the exit. The train was already beginning to move, forcing her to jump down to the platform with less grace than was proper for a lady. James saw her first, his tear-stained face transforming with disbelief and then wild joy. "Papa, Papa, look." She stayed. Thomas stood slowly, his expression shifting from resignation to cautious hope as Sophia walked toward them. The train picked up speed behind her, clattering away toward the east without her aboard. "You missed your train," Thomas said when she reached them, his voice carefully neutral despite the hope flaring in his eyes. "No," Sophia replied, her heart full to bursting. "I think I finally caught the right one." James whooped with delight, throwing his arms around her waist. Thomas stood frozen for a moment, then stepped forward, his hands coming to rest lightly on her shoulders. "Are you sure?" he asked, searching her face. "Blackford, we'll find another bride," Sophia finished firmly. "Or perhaps discover that security isn't the only thing worth seeking in marriage." "And you?" Thomas's voice dropped lower. "What are you seeking, Sophia Jones?" She placed her hand over his heart, feeling its strong, steady beat beneath her palm. "A chance to build something true, with a man who carves wooden roses in the night, and a boy who draws me into his family portrait." Thomas's smile began slowly, then spread across his features like sunrise breaking over the Wyoming hills. "It won't be easy," he warned, even as his arms slid around her waist. "Ranch life is hard, especially for a city woman." "I'm stronger than I look," Sophia countered, returning his smile. "And I believe I was promised the opportunity to apply for the teaching position in town. The school board would be fools not to hire you," Thomas murmured, drawing her closer. "And there's one more thing," Sophia added, her voice softening. "I want to hear about Jane. I want James to know his mother through your memories. I'll never try to replace her." Emotion flickered across Thomas's face, gratitude, grief, and finally, acceptance. "She would have liked you," he said simply. "She would be glad for James. And for me." James tugged at their sleeves, his face split in a wide grin. "Does this mean Miss Jones is staying forever? Will she live with us now?" Thomas looked down at his son, then back at Sophia, a question in his eyes. "That depends," Sophia answered, her eyes never leaving Thomas's face. "Your father hasn't actually asked me yet." Thomas Tucker, rancher, widower, father, and carver of wooden roses, took a deep breath and took a chance. "Sophia Jones, would you do us the honor of becoming part of our family? Not as a mail-order bride, not as a practical arrangement, but as a woman who stepped off at the wrong station and found the right heart." "Yes," Sophia said, her own heart overflowing. "Yes, I will." As Thomas's lips met hers in their first kiss, with James cheering beside them and the Wyoming sun shining down upon the unlikely family they had formed, Sophia knew with absolute certainty that sometimes the greatest journeys begin with a simple mistake and end exactly where you're meant to be all along.